The next component that we'll test is our form. So our form basically consists of the entire application. So it will be an integration test, as it will also include the radio button components and the comment box component. We have a handle change method that's used whenever users enter values inside the inputs and sets the state for our feedback and input value errors. And lastly, we have a handle submit method that is used to send data to the server whenever a user fills out all the required input values and clicks the submit button. To get started testing our form component, we'll import React, the render method, and the form component itself. As in previous tests, I'll add a describe block to wrap all the tests that we'll have for our form component. And for our first test, we want to verify that when the required fields are blank, then the submit button is disabled. We can easily see that when we look at the app, as all the fields are currently blank and submit button is disabled. And as we enter something inside of all of the required fields, then the submit button is enabled. To test that we see the expected behavior, we'll destructure the getByText method off of our rendered component. We'll grab the submit button by its text, and then we'll expect that the submit button has the following class. And this class is only applied when the form has not been completed as expected. So we can save and run our code. And our test passes as expected. And to verify that we are testing what we think we are, we'll say .not.toHaveClass, and we run the test. And our test fails as expected. Now let's change our test back to what we originally had. For our next test, we will verify that when required fields are completed, that the submit button is enabled. We need to import a few extra things in order to make this work. We need to import the user event so that we can simulate a user typing into our inputs, the post feedback module, which is used in our application to make a post fetch request to the server with the data that we have filled out from our form. We did not actually want to call this in our test, so instead we'll use mocked from the TS-Jest utilities to help us mock out that functionality. In addition to that, we'll also use the Jest mock to mock the post feedback module. So our test will look very busy, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So we'll destructure getByText and getByPlaceholderText off of our rendered form to grab specific elements. So for all of our input elements, we'll use getByPlaceholderText. So for example, with name, we're going to grab the placeholder text name, and then we'll use the user event to type into that element, and we'll type the value John. And then we'll expect that input to have the value of John. And we'll do the same for our age input, email, and comment. You may have noticed that I have not selected the radio button, and this is because the way the application is coded, we have a default selection of excellent for our radio button. Then we'll select the submit button, and now that we've typed a value into all the required fields, we're going to make an assertion that it does not have the class opacity -50, etc., indicating that the submit button is now clickable. And now before we actually click the button, this is where we use our mocked method from the TS-Jest utilities in order to mock out the implementation of the post feedback module. Now we can actually click our submit button, and we can make an assertion that the mock call's length was 1. We'll save and run our test suite again. And all of our tests are passing. For our next test, we want to verify that when a user enters special characters, that those values are not accepted. And this is in reference to our name input field. So we'll use the get by placeholder text method off of our rendered component. And we'll grab our name input as we've done before. And with our user event, we'll type into the name input a series of special characters, and we'll make the assertion that the name input is still empty. So we'll save and have our test automatically run again. And our test pass. For our last test, we'll verify that when a user enters a phone number, that the value is accepted. This is especially useful since in our previous tests, we did not use the phone number field as it was not required. So again, we'll use get by placeholder text off of our rendered component. We'll use that to grab the phone input. We'll type into the phone input a series of numbers, and we'll expect that those numbers are visible in the phone input. So we'll save and rerun our tests. And everything passes. So in review, we wrote 4 tests for our form component. The first, verify that when a user enters a phone number, then that value is accepted. We ran a test to verify that when a user enters special characters inside of our name input, that those values are not accepted. We wrote a test to verify that when required fields are completed, then the submit button is enabled. And finally, we wrote a test to verify that when required fields are blank, then the submit button is disabled. Feel free to play around and add other test scenarios that we did not include in this lesson.